And now we'll hear from both Katie Spearritt and Duncan Smith.
Our company, I just thought I'd say a couple of words about our company and the sort of work we do. We always like to get firms to really think specifically about your firm culture, how diversity might help your culture, your performance, your network, and then look at some of the potential barriers.
Just want to start out by just setting the scene here. So when we're working with diversity and inclusion, as Karen has, I really like the way you said, it doesn't happen by accident. So we need to consciously think about how we work with it. And there are 5 what we would call foundations of diversity that we need to understand. Unconscious bias fits within these 5. So the first one is just that we're making a distinction between us and them. How many organizations have you heard talk about diversity, particularly, let's say, gender issues? So what are we doing about women in the organization? Who's we? Okay, so there is an us and them distinction right there. That's the most fundamental place that we start. And then we look within that to say, well, is there a majority and minority here? If we're in the majority, it's quite difficult for us to understand the experience of the minority, or even to remind ourselves what that's like. That takes conscious effort as well. Because within those majority and minority, the us and them, we make assumptions about people. We have biases, our preferences. So important to realize that bias can be positive or negative. And this is where our focus is this morning, a little bit about bias. What I want to illustrate is that we're all biased. Kahneman, have any of you heard of Daniel Kahneman? Nobel Prize winner in economics. And he's a psychologist, so pretty good trick. So the reason he won the Nobel Prize was because he was challenging standard economic theory, which basically says people should behave according to these models, but they don't. Why don't they? And what Kahneman is talking about is the unconscious and the conscious mind, and that's System 1 and System 2 thinking. So System 1, automatic, easy, jumps to conclusions. System 2 is the conscious mind, the rational part, the part we use that requires effort, that does our problem solving for us. So this is the part we mostly use at work, where we're consciously focused on a problem. The challenge is that System 2 is much less active than System 1. Our System 1, our unconscious mind, has vastly greater processing power than our conscious mind. And our conscious mind tends to be lazy. So I'm not going to examine my assumptions unless it becomes really important. Okay, so we've got this picture of a person. Now, we've got bias. Do I like these characteristics? Do I not like them? If I don't know something about a person, if it's harder for me to connect with the person because they're more different to me, more work for System 2, rather not do that, I'd actually rather stay with the people with whom I'm more comfortable. So, just a little quote here from Kahneman. People who are cognitively busy, would that apply to anyone in this room? People who are cognitively busy are also more likely to make selfish choices, use sexist language, and make superficial judgments in social situations. Why is that? Because we're bad people? No, because our brains are busy, and so we go automatically to these other things that we do, make these snap judgments. And we're not even aware that we do it. One of the things we know from the research of the way our brain works is that because we're more comfortable with the familiar, there is this, I just wanted to refresh myself on what it was called, the exposure effect. The more I'm exposed to something, the more comfortable I am. In fact, a lot of the work that's been done over the years in diversity would say, if you want to reduce bias, just have people have more contact with each other. And then you start to see the similarities, the connections that you have as people, and you start to diminish the effect of accent or race or gender or sexuality or whatever it may be. And I kind of see a link here with the legal profession. We're all used to seeing the senior partners of law firms being men, primarily. So both men and women are used to seeing that. And particularly for the men, it's of course very comfortable. And we've worked with all male teams who really enjoy how inclusive they are. Of course, it's easier to be inclusive when people are similar to you, but This is where we put diversity and inclusion kind of together. So I would like to hypothesize that one of the barriers for having more women in senior positions is our whole unconscious bias around what leadership looks like, and that we make decisions. So some examples?
Some examples. The most common type of bias is the one that Doug was just talking about, that affinity bias. And that's the name that what happens is that we gravitate to people who are like us, who have a sense of familiarity and comfort with us. It's totally normal that we do this in social situations, we do this in the workplace. But what are some of the impacts of that? So as Duncan mentioned, we worked with one law firm who said we're such a collegiate group. We're so inclusive. We don't understand why, in this case, women don't necessarily want to be part of our group because look at us, we're so close. We really had to work with that group on understanding the flip side and how people were feeling excluded from that group. And again, they didn't mean to. In fact, they thought they were doing the right thing by creating that sense of familiarity. But that affinity bias, our preference for working with people like us, might be preventing us from seeing talented people, working with talented people, having our own views challenged.
Can I just jump in for a second? One of the things, if we're in the majority, one of the things we are prone to, or one of the things that we have, coined by a bank president in the US a few years ago, called the privilege of oblivion. So if I'm in the majority situation, I don't have to think about what it's like for the minority, because those things are not happening to me. Therefore, I'm oblivious to them, and that's a privilege.
A couple of other areas of bias. Availability bias. Again, a bit of a fancy term, but it occurs when we base a decision on the first thing that comes to mind. And the other one we talk about a lot is confirmation bias, when we look to confirm our beliefs and preferences. And of course, the other great form of bias that we see, priming. And we do some fun things when we're working with partners on examples of visual illusions and priming. But priming is something that happens, again, all the time. If Raina had come into this session, and we have had this in one law firm, and said, oh, this diversity thing, we're told we've got to get up to speed with it, but, it's a bit of I'm not sure, it's a bit of a fad, and, well, I'm from a different cultural background, so I'm okay. If Raina had come and said that, you'd all be thinking, oh, geez, I'd much rather be uptown and having a coffee. That priming. And we do that in so many ways. The sorts of biases we've heard in our time, let me just give you some examples. Clients prefer men. Clients are, coming from focus groups, clients are uncomfortable with lawyers working flexible hours. Came out of the Victorian Women Lawyers Report, shown to be a myth. Clients are quite comfortable with people working flexible hours. It was the law firms themselves who were uncomfortable with people working flexible hours. A very deep set bias that has been in practice in the law firm for some time. Women just don't have that edge of technical experience that we expect. Women don't want to work 24/7, and that's what it takes to be successful. So these are comments about why, in this case, gender diversity. There's other ones. Lawyers need to look and sound Australian. Transactional work, commercial work, only suitable for full-time lawyers, 24/7. That's why you don't have much diversity in transactional areas.
Our sort of one recommendation for anyone looking to work in this area of diversity, inclusion, unconscious bias is start to have the conversations. For no other reason than the fact that, well, maybe it's just me, I find that, okay, here's my bias, I find the conversations themselves quite fascinating as we start to unpack what our biases are and what the impact is at work. So the key message is, if you're human, you have biases. So understanding what they are and how they affect yourself and other people around you at work is the key to then making some progress in this area.